Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today, we're diving into the golden trio of Hogwarts: Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Yes, they saved the school, battled evil, and won. But let's not forget, along the way, they broke the rules, repeatedly, in ways that would have gotten any other student sent home with their trunk packed. So let's take a look at rule-breaking moments that could have gotten them expelled. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Unauthorized. Visit to Hogsmeade. Using the Marauders map. Third-year students were allowed to visit Hogsmeade, but only with signed permission from a parent or guardian. Harry, of course, didn't have one. The Dursleys weren't about to sign anything. Enter Fred and George, who gifted him the Marauders map, a magical ticket to sneak around unseen. Cloak on, map in hand and off. Harry went across the school boundaries. Rule violation? Definitely. Consequences? None. Number 2, founding Dumbledore's army. Dolores Umbridge. Need we say more? Under her, defense against the dark arts became a theory-only snooze fest. Hermione had a better idea. Harry would be the teacher. And so Dumbledore's army was born, a secret group of students practicing real magic. But it was strictly against Umbridge's orders, a major infraction. And yet, the trio slipped away unscathed. Number 3, flying a car to Hogwarts. When the barrier at platform 934 refused to let Ron and Harry through, their solution was, let's take the car. And just like that, they stole Mr. Weasley's enchanted Ford Anglia. They soared over London, crash-landed on Hogwarts grounds, and nearly got thrashed by the Whomping Willow. Muggles were alarmed. The tree was furious. Expulsion seemed inevitable, but somehow they got away with it. Number 4, team disarming of Snape. Severus Snape. Complex character, rarely on friendly terms with the Golden Trio. In one moment of panic, trying to protect Lupin, the trio simultaneously hit Snape with Expelliarmus so hard he flew into the air and passed out. Attacking a teacher? 100%. Punishment? 0. Number 5, midnight strolls under the invisibility cloak. Harry had a habit of sneaking around the castle under his invisibility cloak, sometimes to visit Hagrid, sometimes to explore the restricted section, breaking curfew, unlocking forbidden doors, sneaking into places he really shouldn't. And again, no consequences. Even Filch seemed to have given up. Number 6, stealing Thestrals to fly to the Ministry. After seeing a vision of Sirius in trouble, Harry didn't wait for adult help. Instead, he and his friends borrowed 6 Thestrals. These magical creatures were supposed to stay safely on school grounds, but instead they flew a group of kids straight into London. Unauthorized departure and magical creature theft? Easily grounds for expulsion, but again, the trio emerged as heroes. Number 7, journey into the Forbidden Forest. Back in the Chamber of Secrets days, Harry and Ron headed into the Forbidden Forest, a place explicitly off-limits and full of dangers. There they nearly became dinner for Aragog's spider family. Foolish? Yes. Brave? Also yes. Expellable? You'd think so, but not in Hogwarts, apparently. Number 8. Secret dragon smuggling operation. Hagrid hatched a baby dragon Norbert. Problem is, dragon breeding is strictly illegal. The solution? Smuggle the little guy to Ron's brother Charlie. The plan? Sneak to the tallest tower in the dead of night and hand off Norbert to Charlie's friends. Smooth operation, aside from breaking about a dozen school and magical laws. Number 9, brewing and using Polyjuice potion. Polyjuice potion isn't child's play. It involves rare ingredients, some stored in Snape's private supplies. The Golden Trio stole from Snape, tricked Lockhart to access the restricted section, brewed the potion in a bathroom, infiltrated the Slytherin common room in disguise. If that's not an expulsion-worthy combo, what is? Number 10, entering the 3rd floor corridor. Anyone who does not wish to die a most painful death should avoid the 3rd floor corridor, said Dumbledore. Naturally, Harry, Ron, and Hermione went. And not just that, they braved every magical trap, snuck past the three-headed dog, battled devil's snare and chess pieces, all to stop Voldemort. Yes, they saved the school, but they also broke a direct order from the headmaster. Number 11, using the time turner to save Sirius and Buckbeak. Time travel wasn't part of the curriculum. And yet, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor McGonagall gave Hermione Granger a time turner, a device so powerful the Ministry kept it under lock and key. Officially, it was for attending multiple classes at once. Unofficially, it became something else entirely. When Sirius Black was sentenced to the Dementor's kiss without trial, Dumbledore didn't stop it directly. Instead, he looked at Hermione and said, "You know the laws, Miss Granger. If you succeed, more than one innocent life may be spared tonight." It wasn't permission. It was a riddle. And they understood. Harry and Hermione turned the hourglass. They went back in time. They freed Buckbeak from execution. They broke Sirius out of the tower. They soared into the night on the back of a hippogriff. 3 turns should do it, Hermione whispered. And with those 3 turns, they rewrote history. The future bent around them. It worked, but it was illegal. Unauthorized use of time magic, interference with ministry proceedings, and releasing a convicted fugitive. The consequences should have been enormous, but there were none, because in Hogwarts, when you break the rules for the right reasons, the rules vanish. Number 12, spying on Malfoy with forbidden magic. Draco Malfoy was acting strange, and Harry knew it. He watched the way Draco vanished from the Great Hall, how he whispered with Crabbe and Goyle in corners, how his face grew thinner with each passing week. Harry became obsessed. "He's a Death Eater," he told Ron and Hermione. They didn't believe him, but that didn't stop him. He used everything he had, the Marauders map, the invisibility cloak, eavesdropping spells like Muffliato and extendable ears. He even brewed potions to stay alert. Hermione begged him to stop. "You don't have any proof, Harry," she said. But Ron, half distracted and always loyal, shrugged and let it go. Harry wasn't just watching Draco, he was hunting him. One of the darkest moments came when Harry enlisted Ginny. He asked her to distract Draco so he could sneak into the luggage compartment of the Hogwarts Express and spy. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was a full surveillance mission. Lying, manipulation, unauthorized magic in the corridors. And it didn't stop there. No one caught him. No professor ever questioned how Harry knew so much or why he was missing meals. He cornered Malfoy in the bathroom and ended up casting Sectum Sempra, a spell he didn't fully understand, blood everywhere. But even then the punishment was light, because it was Harry, because Draco was a Slytherin, and because, somehow, war made spies of children. Number 13. Sneaking into the Ministry of Magic in school uniform. The vision came without warning. Sirius Black tortured by Voldemort deep inside the Ministry of Magic. Harry saw it, or thought he did. He didn't ask Dumbledore. He didn't tell McGonagall. He gathered Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, and Luna, and said, "We're going to save him." And they went. They left Hogwarts without permission. They flew on Thestrals into London airspace. They walked, still in school robes, straight into the Ministry, a place guarded by adult witches, protected by magical defenses. But they slipped past it all. They rode the elevator into the Department of Mysteries. They broke into a vault. They shattered prophecy orbs and triggered alarms. Then came the battle. 6 students against the Death Eaters, Bellatrix Lestrange, Lucius Malfoy, Dolohov. Wands clashed, curses flew. Ron was knocked unconscious. Hermione was nearly killed. Neville's nose was broken, and in the chaos, Sirius fell behind the veil. Gone. "Come on, you can do better than that," he had shouted just before his death. The aftermath was silence. No arrest, no expulsion. The Ministry buried the story. Hogwarts pretended it didn't happen, but something had changed. The trio had crossed into real war, and war doesn't follow school rules. Number 14, using forbidden magic, During Defense Against the Dark Arts lessons, Dolores Umbridge banned practical magic. "You will not be needing wands," she said with her sickly smile. Defense Against the Dark Arts became theory, worksheets, silence. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione weren't the kind to sit still while the world darkened, so they found a room that didn't exist on any map. The Room of Requirement appeared when called, and it gave them exactly what they needed, a place to break the rules. Harry became a teacher. He showed Neville how to disarm. Luna learned to summon a Patronus. "You're a really good teacher, Harry," Hermione whispered one evening as spells lit the hidden room. Students paired off, cast Stupefy, Impedimenta, and even Petrificus Totalis on one another. It was secret. It was illegal. It was necessary. They called it Dumbledore's Army, just kids forming a rebellion under the nose of the most dangerous woman Hogwarts had ever seen. If caught, they faced expulsion. The educational decrees made it clear no student organization may exist without the High Inquisitor's approval. They met anyway, they practiced magic, they prepared for war. From a discipline standpoint, it was madness, children training in combat behind enchanted doors. If any other group had done this, they'd be in Azkaban before Christmas. But Harry? He wasn't punished, he became a symbol, a leader, and somehow, even as he defied every school rule in the book, the castle itself seemed to stand behind him. Number 15. Skipping classes for personal investigations. At Hogwarts, skipping class was rare, but for Harry, Ron, and Hermione, it became a pattern, a ritual of rebellion. When the school buzzed with whispers of danger, they didn't just listen, they acted. Timetables meant nothing when there were mysteries to solve. And while Hermione often made sure her essays were submitted on time, Harry and Ron vanished from class. So often it was a wonder their chairs weren't declared abandoned property. In their 6th year, the trio became obsessed with uncovering the truth about the Half-Blood Prince. Harry flipped through the margins of the old potions book, while Hermione stormed off to the library. When the name Sectum Sempra appeared, he didn't ask questions. He skipped arithmancy and went to test it. Later, when Dumbledore revealed Voldemort's use of Horcruxes, the trio again stopped caring about school bells. They spent hours sneaking into the restricted section, searching for forbidden magic. Schedules dissolved under the weight of destiny. "Where have you been?" McGonagall once snapped at Harry after he missed an entire afternoon of lessons. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Telling her he had been shadowing Snape through a secret corridor to confirm whether he was still loyal would have raised more questions than answers. So, like always, they got away with it. Somehow, the rules never applied to them the same way they did to others. The professors seemed to know, to expect it, that if Harry Potter was missing, he wasn't misbehaving, he was investigating. And perhaps deep down they understood that while other students were learning charms, Harry was learning how to survive. Still, no one ever said it aloud, that 3 students had quietly given themselves the right to decide what mattered more, a class or the fate of the world. Number 16. Illegal access to Slughorn's memory in his office. The door to Slughorn's office creaked open and Harry Potter stepped inside, not with a question, but with a plan. In his pocket was a vial of Felix Felicis, the rare and powerful potion that promised perfect luck. Dumbledore had asked him to retrieve a memory. Not any memory, the memory. The one Slughorn had twisted and edited, the one that hid the truth about Tom Riddle and Horcruxes. Harry didn't ask nicely. He didn't confess the stakes. He drank the potion and let its golden glow guide him. "Trust the potion," he murmured to himself. What followed was a performance. He laughed, joked, dropped just enough hints to stir Slughorn's conscience. He flattered, he maneuvered. Slughorn, caught in the warm haze of wine and nostalgia, finally gave in. "You're like your mother, you know. She had a way with people too." And just like that, he handed over the memory he had kept hidden for years. But what Harry did wasn't innocent. He used magical influence to manipulate a teacher. He invaded private mental space, a sacred thing in the magical world. Slughorn didn't agree to this conversation with full understanding. He was nudged, pushed, softened, until the resistance crumbled. Imagine another student doing the same, charming a professor into revealing dangerous secrets. There would have been consequences, serious ones. Yet Harry faced none, not a word of reprimand, because he wasn't just a student, he was the chosen one, the boy with a mission bigger than rules, and in that moment Hogwarts showed once more that when the stakes are high enough, even the most sacred boundaries, like memory, consent, and truth, can be bent in silence. Number 17, secretly eavesdropping with the two-way mirror. Harry gripped the small shard of mirror tightly in his hand. It was late. The tower felt too quiet. The air carried that uneasy stillness that warned him something was wrong. The enchanted two-way mirror, once given to him by Sirius Black, was meant for private communication, an untraceable way to talk between two trusted friends. But Harry had begun using it for more than just conversation. He used it to listen, to watch. After Dumbledore's return to the school in Half-Blood Prince, Harry grew suspicious of Draco Malfoy's odd behavior. He was disappearing often. His face looked sickly, haunted. One night, with the mirror in his pocket, Harry waited outside the room of requirement, trying to catch even a glimpse of what Malfoy was doing inside. "I solemnly swear I'm up to no good," he whispered. Not to the Marauders' map this time, but to himself. He raised the mirror and called out, hoping for an image. Instead, he got a flicker, light in the tower, a whisper of motion. It wasn't just about Sirius anymore. It was about knowing things others didn't want him to know. There's a moment when Harry tries to use the mirror to reach Sirius, only to realize far too late that Sirius was gone. Sirius? He had called into the glass, heart pounding. Silence. The mirror reflected only himself. That moment branded the object with more than magic. It became a symbol of secrets, of what he couldn't change. But when he used the mirror again, not to call but to spy, it crossed into murky territory. He was no longer seeking comfort. He was gathering information. Alone. In secret. Number 18, Operation Free the House Elf. It all began in the worn and dusty corner of the Gryffindor common room, where Hermione Granger, with parchment spread across her lap and firelight flickering in her determined eyes, launched what would come to be known, by a select, equally determined few, as the most controversial underground campaign ever waged at Hogwarts, the Unauthorized Liberation of House Elves. The name she gave it, SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, sounded almost comical to her peers. But to Hermione it was a declaration of war against centuries of systemic servitude. By her 4th year at Hogwarts, Hermione had seen enough. The moment she saw Winky, crouched sobbing in shame after being dismissed by Mr. Crouch at the Quidditch World Cup, something in her snapped. "You've got the wrong idea," she shouted at Ron, who had sneered at Winky's emotional state. "House elves are not happy being enslaved. They've just been brainwashed into thinking they are." But her arguments fell on deaf ears. Even Hagrid, kind-hearted and empathetic as he was, told her she was fighting a hopeless battle. "They like it, Hermione," he said. "It's in their nature, that's all." But Hermione didn't buy it, and what she couldn't change with words, she would try to change with action. Soon the Slytherins began mocking her. Malfoy called her the mad elf knitter. Even Harry and Ron often rolled their eyes. But Hermione pressed on. In a corner of the library, behind ancient volumes on transmutation and arithmancy, she hid her manifesto and recruitment flyers. She carried bundles of knitted socks and hats in her bag and began strategically placing them in the Gryffindor common room, hidden under discarded cloaks, stuffed into crevices in the walls and laid atop piles of laundry in the hopes that an unsuspecting elf might pick one up and earn their freedom. It was, in Hermione's eyes, a rescue mission disguised as laundry. Her secret weapon was the laundry itself. House elves were forbidden from taking clothing unless it was directly gifted by their masters, but the rules were murky when it came to finding clothes left lying around. Dobby, the only known free elf at Hogwarts, supported her cause wholeheartedly. "Miss Hermione is giving them freedom," he squeaked once, eyes brimming with gratitude. "Dobby is helping too. Dobby is telling the elves to take the clothes when they is cleaning." But Dobby's enthusiasm was not shared by the others. Most house elves were horrified by the idea. They began avoiding Gryffindor Tower entirely. "They is insulted," Dobby confessed sadly. "They is thinking Miss Hermione is saying they is not good enough." Winky, who had taken a position in the Hogwarts kitchens, had refused to speak to her at all. Hermione, for all her good intentions, had inadvertently triggered a cultural backlash. The elves didn't want her help. They wanted their dignity. But Hermione, undeterred, doubled down. She whispered to Dobby to find out when the elves would clean certain parts of the castle. Then she'd sneak there ahead of time and leave a sock or hat behind. She began keeping a log in a charmed notebook: date, time, location, clothing type, whether it had been taken. Her approach was organized, methodical, almost scientific. To her, this wasn't mischief, this was a mission. The operation reached its most daring phase during a cold December night in her 4th year. The trio had just returned from the Yule Ball. Ron was sulking, Harry was brooding, and Hermione, her hair still slightly curled from the evening, was pacing her dormitory with a look of absolute focus. She waited until the castle had quieted and crept through the corridors under the cloak of darkness. With Harry's invisibility cloak, borrowed without asking, she made her way down to the kitchens. There she saw them, rows of house elves preparing pastries for the morning meal, stirring cauldrons, folding napkins. Dobby met her with a wide grin. "Miss Hermione, Dobby has been watching. The elves is cleaning corridor 11 tonight." She nodded, slipping past the doors and racing down the corridor, where she left behind a pile of miniature sweaters, knitted with crooked sleeves but full of meaning. To Hermione, each stitch was an act of defiance. It wasn't until several weeks later that Professor McGonagall summoned her. "Miss Granger," she began, voice measured, "is it true you've been leaving clothing around the castle for the house elves to find?" Hermione's throat tightened. "Yes, Professor." "But only because—" "Hermione," McGonagall interrupted gently, "while I admire your conviction, you must understand that Hogwarts is not a political playground. These creatures live by their own laws. You cannot free someone who does not wish to be freed." Hermione didn't apologize. She couldn't. To her, this wasn't about rules. It was about justice. But in the eyes of the school, particularly its older professors, she was teetering dangerously close to cultural imperialism. Who was she to decide what the elves wanted? Wasn't it their choice? The ethical dilemma tore her in two. On one side stood moral clarity, the idea that no creature should live in bondage. On the other, the harsh truth that intervention could be harmful when unwanted. "I just want them to be free," she told Harry one evening, voice cracking. "Why doesn't anyone else care?" Harry didn't know how to answer. He admired her resolve, but had seen firsthand the discomfort it caused. Even the students in Hufflepuff began complaining about losing points due to elf-related laundry disturbances. Still, Hermione's intentions were never cruel. They were simply uncompromising. And so the operation continued in secret. Dobby remained her sole ally. "Dobby has freed 2 elves," he reported once, beaming. "They is scared, but they is thankful. Dobby is finding them homes." But the others still rejected the gifts, viewing them as insults. One elf, in a fit of anger, had even thrown a sock into the fire. Hermione cried that night, but she never stopped. Eventually, Professor Dumbledore became aware. He approached her after a meeting of the DA, his eyes twinkling behind his half-moon glasses. "Miss Granger," he said, "change does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, one small enough to be overlooked but loud enough to echo through time. Perhaps your whisper is just beginning." Hermione didn't understand what he meant then, but she would, years later. Number 19. Interfering with the Triwizard Tournament. In the shadowed corridors of Hogwarts, rules had always served as a sort of polite suggestion rather than unyielding law, especially when it came to the Golden Trio. But during the events of the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the very fabric of the tournament's structure, its rules, its oaths, its supposed impartiality, was torn apart both by dark forces and by the relentless loyalty of two best friends who refused to let Harry face death alone. This wasn't a game, the stakes were lethal, and so, naturally, the rules had to break. Harry never volunteered. That fact was plain from the start, etched into the confusion that struck the Great Hall when the Goblet of Fire spat out his name. Harry Potter, Dumbledore had read aloud, his voice filled with disbelief. At just 14, Harry was thrust into a competition meant for those at least 3 years his senior, wizards with full control over their magic, experience in combat, and knowledge of the dark arts. Harry had none of that. What he did have was Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, and their willingness to cheat every law in the book if it meant keeping him alive. The first task was brutal in its simplicity. Face a dragon, a real one. No illusion, no protection, just scales, flame, and talons. Harry had no idea how to prepare until Hermione, calm and determined, proposed a dangerous idea. "You need a broom," she whispered, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're best in the air, Harry. You need to fly." And that's when she taught him the summoning charm, Accio. It wasn't in the 4th-year curriculum, it wasn't even in the 5th. Hermione had to dig through piles of spellbooks to find the proper incantation and its wand movement. They practiced in secret, behind silencing charms and locked doors. "Accio Firebolt," Harry would yell again and again, until at last he could call distant objects to him with sheer force of will. When he stood in the arena and yelled it with the eyes of the wizarding world watching, it wasn't just bravery that carried him, it was Hermione's defiance of the rules that gave him the tool to survive. But Hermione wasn't the only one bending the system. Ron, despite his initial jealousy and cold shoulder, came around, and when he did, he came back fiercely loyal. By the second task, he and Hermione were both knee-deep in treacherous schemes. They snuck into the restricted section of the library at night, using Harry's invisibility cloak, again forbidden. They rummaged through ancient texts, seeking anything about underwater breathing. "We need gillyweed," Neville Longbottom said, inspired by a conversation with Professor Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. But how did Harry end up with it? Dobby, the house elf, delivered the gillyweed the morning of the task. But where did Dobby get it? It was stolen, taken from Snape's personal stores, something only Hermione or Ron could have orchestrated. There's no direct confession, but the chain of events points clearly. Information passed, stolen goods procured, and once again a law broken for the greater good. The professors turned a blind eye, or perhaps they too knew that the rules had already failed Harry once, and this was damage control in the name of justice. The third task was no different. It was a maze, ever-shifting, filled with magical traps and monstrous creatures. There, even information was a commodity. While other champions trained in silence, Harry was fed tips and warnings, not just by his friends, but by Mad-Eye Moody, whose motivations were twisted. But Hermione and Ron still did their part. They mapped out maze logic, anticipated curses, and studied hexes far beyond their year. One night, Hermione pulled out Confronting the Faceless, a defense against the dark arts textbook from the 6th year, and said, "You'll need to learn the impediment jinx. You can't just rely on luck in there." Again, it was cheating. Subtle, perhaps, but still a violation of every rule the tournament claimed to uphold. The other champions were alone. Harry was not. He had a team, a rogue team of clever rule-breakers who saw bureaucracy as an enemy when it endangered their friend's life. "It's not fair," Ron had once muttered under his breath. "They put you in this, Harry. We're just trying to get you out in one piece." Fairness was irrelevant in a game rigged from the start. Barty Crouch Jr., using Polyjuice potion to impersonate Moody, manipulated the entire tournament to get Harry to the graveyard. Every task, every challenge, every point awarded or deducted, it was all orchestrated. But in the face of that corruption, the loyalty of Ron and Hermione was the only true force working in Harry's favor. And they weren't just helping him prepare, they were actively interfering. In the days before each task, Ron would watch the other champions eavesdrop on Crumb and report back. "He's been practicing something with his wand," he told Harry. "Some kind of rope trick. I think it's a binding charm." Hermione used her connection with Victor Crumb to subtly draw out details, even at the Yule Ball. "He said the Durmstrang ship has wards around it. They train with dark spells, Harry. Be careful." These were not idle observations. They were reconnaissance missions. In a real war, such tactics would be called espionage. In a school tournament, they were blatant violations, but no one stopped them. No prefects, no professors, not even Dumbledore, whose omniscient gaze always seemed to miss what the trio did in the shadows. Then there were the spells themselves. Beyond Actio and the impediment jinx, Harry used the shield charm, Protego, during the maze, another spell not part of the regular fourth-year syllabus. He had learned it because Hermione insisted, "You're going to get hexed. You need to protect yourself, not just dodge." They practiced it again and again, even though it left Harry winded each time. By the time he entered the maze, he was armed with enough magic to pass for a sixth-year student. Number 20. Breaking into Umbridge's office. Of all the reckless escapades Harry Potter and his friends undertook at Hogwarts, few were as daring or as dangerous as their mission to break into Dolores Umbridge's office during her iron-fisted regime as High Inquisitor. It wasn't mischief, it wasn't curiosity. It was a desperate act of resistance, a last-ditch effort to contact the Order of the Phoenix at a time when Hogwarts had become a fortress of fear. The walls whispered with threats, every hallway was a trap. And yet on that cold evening, Harry, Hermione and Ron did what no other students dared. They infiltrated the office of the most feared woman at school, risking expulsion, imprisonment, or worse. Umbridge's office was not just a room, it was a lair. Pink, prim, and poisoned with power, it sat like a spider at the center of her web of surveillance. Every quill stroke, every whisper, every rebellious thought seemed to be known to her within moments. Behind the lace curtains and rows of decorative plates bearing meowing kittens lurked the tools of oppression. Educational decrees papered the walls like propaganda. Chains had replaced rules. She watched, and she punished. And still, Harry knew he had no choice but to go inside. The reason was simple. Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, his last true link to family, was in danger, or so Harry believed. What began as a troubling vision during one of his nightmares turned into a boiling fear. Sirius was being held captive and tortured in the Department of Mysteries. Harry was convinced of it. And there was no way to check without using the Flu network in Umbridge's fireplace, the only one in the castle still connected to the external magical world. "There's no other way," Hermione had said quietly, biting her lip, her eyes flicking toward the window where the sky was already darkening. "We have to do it tonight, before she tightens security again." And so the trio plotted their infiltration with the precision of professional spies. Their plan relied on stealth, speed, and a hefty dose of Felix Felicis, liquid luck, which Harry had used once before, but this time they would go without it. This mission was powered by desperation. They waited until the corridors were empty, until the sounds of dinner had faded, and until Filch's lantern bobbed far down the hall. Then they moved. Their first challenge was simple, yet perilous, getting into the office without alerting the Inquisitorial Squad, a band of student informants led by Draco Malfoy, who had taken to patrolling the halls like bloodhounds. "Just imagine, Potter," Malfoy had sneered days earlier, "caught sneaking into a teacher's office. I bet Azkaban would love to have you." It wasn't an empty threat. Umbridge had close ties to the Ministry. A student caught committing such an offence under her rule might disappear and never be seen again. They timed their move perfectly. Harry led the way, with Hermione casting a disillusionment charm over them, making them shimmer like heat on stone. Ron whispered incantations under his breath to silence their footsteps. When they reached the door, they faced their second hurdle. Umbridge's office was protected by enchantments that reacted violently to unauthorized magic. Hermione leaned in close, studying the runes glowing faintly in the doorframe. "It's a bloodlock," she said grimly. "It requires her magical signature, or—" She trailed off, thinking fast. Then she did something Harry would remember forever. She pricked her own finger and pressed it to the rune. It sizzled. The door swung open. Inside, the office reeked of perfume and power. The walls shimmered with surveillance spells. The fire was burning softly in the hearth, and the same decorative kitten plates stared down at them with silent judgment. Ron muttered, "I've had nightmares that look like this." But Harry had no time for humour. He dashed to the fireplace, reaching into his robes for the pouch of flu powder. "I'll go," he said. "Just me. If anything happens—" "You're not doing this alone," Hermione interrupted. "If something goes wrong, we'll all be in trouble. That's the point." Harry nodded, took a deep breath, and threw the powder into the flames. "Number 12, Grimmauld Place." The green fire roared. He thrust his head in and at once was somewhere else. The hearth of Grimmauld Place was cold, empty. The room was dark. "Sirius!" he called. "Sirius!" But there was no answer. Then, out of the shadows, a voice replied, "Not Sirius's, but creatures." The old house elf sneered at him. "He will not come. He will not help. He has gone to the Ministry." And that's when Harry knew he'd been tricked. Meanwhile, back in Umbridge's office, the worst had happened. The door flew open. Dolores Umbridge stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with rage, wand already drawn. "Well, well," she hissed. "Caught in the act." Ron and Hermione froze. Harry tried to pull his head back from the fireplace, but it was too late. She had seen. She knew, and the door slammed shut behind her like a prison gate. "You foolish children," she snapped, rounding on them. "Using my fire, breaking into my office. Do you know what the Ministry does to traitors?" Her face was flushed. She trembled, with barely concealed fury. She called for backup, summoned members of the inquisitorial squad, who soon arrived with smug grins and wands at the ready. "Get them out," she barked. "Take them to the Forbidden Forest if I must, but they will talk." What followed was one of the tensest scenes in Order of the Phoenix. Umbridge threatened to use the Cruciatus Curse on students, illegal, immoral, and shockingly within character for her. "You have no authority!" Hermione cried, trying to shield Harry. "I am the authority!" Umbridge shrieked. And then, brilliantly, Hermione did something unexpected. She began to cry. "I'll tell you," she sobbed. "I'll tell you everything. But not here. It's in the Forbidden Forest. That's where we've been hiding it." It was, of course, a lie. But it worked. Number 21, using the Half-Blood Prince's book. In the musty cupboards of the Half-Blood Prince's old potions textbook, Harry Potter found more than just notes. He found an entirely different philosophy of magic. Sharp-edged, inventive, dangerous. The moment his fingers brushed the worn leather cover of that advanced potion-making volume, dust rose like whispers of secrets never meant for daylight. Scribbled notes ran down the margins like whispered instructions from a ghost. "This book is property of the Half-Blood Prince," it read in loopy handwriting. An alias unknown to Harry at the time, but destined to haunt him. It began as a convenience. Professor Slughorn's potions class was notoriously difficult, and Harry, unprepared, due to not expecting to be in the NEWT level class, had no personal textbook. He was handed a battered old copy from the cupboard. Ron's identical version was crisp, clean, and entirely unhelpful. Harry's, by contrast, had its pages soaked in marginalia. The notes corrected textbook instructions, often improving them drastically. The effect was immediate. Harry became the star of the class. Even Slughorn, impressed by his sudden genius, remarked, "Harry, my boy, you must have inherited your mother's knack." But the truth was darker. The prince's notes not only contained potion enhancements, but also spells not found in any official curriculum. These weren't ministry-approved charms or standard Hogwarts material. They were shadowy, personal inventions. One of the first signs of trouble came with Levicorpus, a spell that hoisted its victim by the ankle into the air, originally used by Harry on Ron in jest. It wasn't taught in Defense Against the Dark Arts. It wasn't even taught in the forbidden sections. It was homemade magic, crafted in secrecy. Harry was enthralled. The prince's magic had a raw brilliance, a rebellious pulse. It wasn't just about power, it was about precision, about thinking around corners. The spells worked because they were clever. And for a time, they offered Harry the one thing he always longed for, an edge. "He's just better than me," Ron had said more than once during potions, an edge of frustration in his voice. Hermione, by contrast, was disturbed. She called the book dodgy, warned Harry about using unknown spells, but he was too intoxicated by success to listen. It all came to a boiling point with Sectum Sempra. Scribbled in ink beside the incantation were the chilling words, "For enemies." It wasn't a hex. It wasn't a prank. It was a weapon. Harry discovered it almost by accident and never fully understood its power until it was too late. In a heated confrontation in the boys' bathroom, Harry used it on Draco Malfoy, not realizing its consequences. A moment later, Draco lay bleeding on the floor, gushing from invisible gashes as though sliced by invisible swords. The scene was horrifying. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword. Rowling writes, "Panic gripped Harry. He hadn't meant to cause that much harm. He hadn't known the spell would do that. Snape arrived in time to save Draco's life, using an incantation Harry didn't recognize, stemming the bleeding and carrying the boy away." The look Snape gave Harry afterward was pure loathing, not just for what had happened, but because Harry had found his book. For the Half-Blood Prince was no mere genius from a forgotten era. It was Severus Snape himself, a younger, angrier, more brilliant version, filled with isolation and bitterness, who had written his secrets into the margins of that book during his student years. Snape's magic was born of pain, and Sectum Sempra was a spell forged from rage. Harry had unknowingly walked into Snape's mind, into his legacy, and used it against someone in a moment of teenage fury. The moral implications are staggering. Hogwarts, the bastion of magical education, had no controls in place to prevent students from using such materials. A school governed by strict safety protocols allowed a student to wield a near-murderous curse simply because it was written in an old book. Where were the wards, the magical safeguards? The truth is, they didn't exist. The book was unmonitored, the spell was unregistered, and a 16-year-old nearly committed manslaughter in a school bathroom because of it. Harry received detention but no expulsion, no ministry inquiry, no legal consequence. One can argue, of course, that Harry didn't intend real harm, that the spell's effect was unknown to him, but that defense wouldn't hold water in any Muggle court. Intent does not negate result, and it certainly doesn't justify the negligence of Hogwarts staff who failed to confiscate the book earlier or who hadn't reviewed what spells students might access. The incident raises haunting questions. If a student could access that level of destructive magic from a borrowed book, what else might be floating in the forgotten cupboards of Hogwarts? What other ghosts of former students, bitter, brilliant, or both, might have left behind magical instructions capable of killing? And what does it say about Harry's choices that he ignored Hermione's many warnings? She told him plainly, "You should turn that book in." But he didn't. Worse, he trusted it. The book became a kind of companion, more helpful in some ways than any living teacher. It didn't judge, it didn't scold, it delivered results. Harry began to rely on it even outside class. The prince had proved a much more effective teacher than Snape so far, he mused. And therein lay the danger, the seduction of unearned power. Harry was being trained by someone who once called people mudbloods and created a spell to slice flesh like paper. There's tragedy in that too, because the book isn't just a plot device, it's a mirror. It reflects Harry's desperation to succeed, to survive, to finally gain the upper hand in a world that's always out to hurt him. The half-blood prince offered a shortcut. It came at a cost. Malfoy's pale, blood-covered body was the bill, and Harry paid it with shame and horror. After the attack, Harry hid the book, not destroyed it, just hid it. He didn't turn it in or report its true contents. He placed it in the room of requirement, out of sight but not out of mind. He did this not only out of fear, but out of guilt. He wasn't ready to sever ties with that part of himself. Perhaps he recognized in some deep place that a piece of him, the part that thirsted for power, still admired the prince. This entire subplot also peels back layers on Snape's own adolescence. He was a boy genius, clearly, but one marinating in darkness. The creation of spells like Sectum Sempra speaks to a young man who was both brilliant and vengeful. How many times had Snape been humiliated, pushed, beaten, mocked by James Potter and Sirius Black? How much rage did he pour into those pages, turning shame into incantation? When Harry used those spells, he wasn't just using magic, he was touching trauma. There's a poetry to how Snape later reacts. He recognizes the spell instantly. "Where did you learn that?" he hisses, barely able to contain himself. Because that wasn't just any spell, it was his. A piece of his past turned into a weapon by the son of his old enemy. The violation was personal, intimate, unforgivable. Harry didn't just hurt Draco, he unearthed Snape's buried history. What's even more alarming is how effective the spell was. Sectum Sempra bypassed Shield's armor and intent. It inflicted damage faster than Avada Kedavra. One can only imagine what would have happened had Harry aimed at the chest instead of randomly slashing. The magical world regulates unforgivable curses with extreme prejudice, but this homebrewed spell, deadly efficient, it was technically not illegal because it wasn't known. And that's the haunting truth at the center of it all. The most dangerous magic may not be the ancient kind, but the private kind, the kind created in shadows, the kind passed in books, scribbled in ink, untested, undocumented. Hogwarts was not prepared for this. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, allowed the book to remain in circulation, trusting fate, and perhaps Harry's morality, too much. The entire episode reflects one of the core themes of the series. Power without understanding is dangerous. Harry had the spell, but not the context. He had the method, but not the meaning. He took the prince's knowledge, but not his pain, not his caution, not his full story. And magic, especially magic forged in emotion, cannot be wielded safely without knowing the emotion behind it. In the end, the Half-Blood Prince's book is a character of its own. It whispers through pages, tempts through results, teaches through shortcuts, and like many dark teachers, it gives just enough truth to be convincing, but never enough wisdom to be safe. Harry's mistake wasn't just using it. His mistake was trusting it blindly. And isn't that always the temptation, to reach for the forbidden book, the shortcut, the secret that no one else knows? It's a tale as old as magic. But the scars left on Draco's body and the shadow left on Harry's conscience remind us some books were never meant to be opened. Number 22, fleeing the battlefield at the end of 6th year. The night Albus Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower, Hogwarts was never the same again. The moment Severus Snape whispered the unforgivable curse, Avada Kedavra, and the headmaster's body dropped into the dark abyss, the school plunged into chaos. Screams echoed through the corridors, teachers dashed to secure the grounds, and students were herded into common rooms like frightened cattle. But while most were overwhelmed with grief or paralyzed by fear, 3 students, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, made a decision that defied every rule, every order, and every rational thought. They ran, not away from fear, but toward it. Not with a plan, but with a purpose. In the smouldering aftermath of Dumbledore's death, when Hogwarts tried to stitch itself back together, the trio chose not to return home for the summer, not to seek comfort or safety. Instead, they walked straight into the fire. "We'll go with you," Hermione had said quietly, fiercely, in Dumbledore's office, as Harry stared at the destroyed silver instruments and the weight of the mission sank in. There was no strategy session with professors. No appeal to McGonagall or the Order, no letters to the Ministry. They vanished from Hogwarts with nothing but Dumbledore's riddles, a stolen locket, and a burning sense of duty. Technically, their disappearance from Hogwarts constituted desertion. The school, though no longer the sanctuary it once was, still operated under strict security. After the attack, Aurors patrolled the grounds, curfews were enforced, and students were expected to stay within protected zones. The trio's decision to leave wasn't just reckless, it was against every protective measure in place. No permission was asked, no adult was informed. They slipped away like shadows at dawn, vanishing into a war that was no longer a distant threat but a present nightmare. The act in itself bordered on madness. They had no secure means of transportation, no known hideouts, no allies in the places they planned to go. They only had Dumbledore's final clues about Horcruxes, fragments of Voldemort's soul hidden in obscure, dangerous locations. Hermione brought a tent, Ron a rucksack of essentials, and Harry brought grief, fury, and a half-empty vial of Felix Felicis. They weren't just skipping school, they were abandoning every layer of protection they'd ever known. Their first target, though unknown at the time, was to track and destroy these Horcruxes. But this wasn't some thrilling treasure hunt. Each object was hidden with lethal protections. The locket they already possessed turned against them, spewing poison into their minds. The cup would later be defended by a monstrous curse, and the diadem, resting in the room of requirement, lay beneath layers of arcane concealment. And all of it began with that first step, an unauthorized exodus from Hogwarts grounds. What made their flight so stunning wasn't just its illegality, it was the confidence, or perhaps the desperation, with which they acted. Hermione erased her parents' memories. Ron turned his back on his family. And Harry? He walked away from the last place where he still felt Dumbledore's presence. "I never really thought I'd have to do it alone," he admitted later, his voice hollow as they camped in cold forests and abandoned houses. They were children, taking on a burden meant for warriors. The world around them didn't pause to make room for their quest. Voldemort rose to power with chilling speed. The Ministry fell. Muggleborns were hunted. Hogwarts was turned into a prison, and 3 teenagers branded as fugitives lived off scraps and stolen food, dodging snatchers and hiding from Dementors. They were no longer students. They were soldiers, unofficial, untrained, and unknown, and yet they never looked back. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the trio's first summer in hiding is riddled with fear and internal collapse. "We're not doing this right," Ron shouted during one of their many arguments. "We haven't got a clue where the next one is, we've got no food, and we're just camping like idiots waiting to be caught." This wasn't the triumphant resistance Dumbledore might have imagined. It was raw survival. By leaving without informing the Order of the Phoenix or consulting with professors, they denied themselves valuable resources. Kingsley Shacklebolt, one of the most capable Aurors, could have offered intel. McGonagall, now leading Hogwarts, could have shielded them for longer. But the trio chose secrecy over collaboration. Trust no one, even allies, that was the unspoken rule. And yet there were moments of grace. Hermione's bottomless bag carried everything from healing potions to enchanted books. Ron's instinctive loyalty, though fractured at times, anchored Harry when despair loomed. And Harry, flawed, stubborn Harry, never wavered in his belief that the task was worth the pain. "We're the only ones who can finish this," he said, not as a boast, but a sentence of self-imposed exile. Still, one must ask, had they truly abandoned the battlefield, or had they found a new one? While students remained locked in classrooms under the Carrows regime, Harry and his friends were dismantling the enemy's immortality. They didn't attend lessons, but they passed every test Voldemort unwittingly placed in their path. Not all battles wear uniforms or follow schedules. Their war was waged in shadows, yet their decision had consequences. By fleeing without structure, they drifted for months. Ron, overwhelmed by the weight of failure and the locket's dark influence, deserted them temporarily. It was a devastating blow, one that almost ended the mission. "I thought you knew what you were doing," he shouted before disapparating into the cold night. For a time, even Hermione, ever loyal, doubted their path. Their time in the Forest of Dean symbolized the lowest point. With frostbitten fingers and hollow stomachs, Harry stood in the freezing water, pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the depths, and nearly drowned. Only Ron's miraculous return saved him. It was there, among frost and fear, that they realized. Plans can fail, people can leave, but the mission must endure. In a sense, their desertion was a mirror of Dumbledore's own youth, a boy who sought the Deathly Hallows, obsessed with power and blind to consequences. The trio, however, learned to temper ambition with compassion. They helped Griphook and Luna, saved Mr. Ollivander, and stood by Dobby as he died, with Harry whispering, "Here lies Dobby, a free elf." No student handbook could have prepared them for what they faced. No syllabus covered Horcruxes or hiding spells. But the emotional education they received, the sacrifice, the loss, the pain of choosing right over easy, was far more powerful. And perhaps that's why their desertion from Hogwarts wasn't a failure. It was the beginning of a transformation. They weren't just running away. They were stepping into the legacy Dumbledore had quietly prepared them for. Every lesson, every trial in the past 6 years led to that moment. The chessboard in first year, the basilisk in the chamber, the time-turner mission, the Triwizard Maze, the DA, the Department of Mysteries, all of it was training. And now, without warning, the test had begun. Ironically, while the trio faced life and death in obscurity, the Ministry branded them as enemies. Harry's face appeared on undesirable number 1 posters. Muggleborns were warned not to associate with them. Their friends at Hogwarts, like Neville Longbottom, risked beatings to keep the spirit of resistance alive. What the trio sparked by leaving school became a fire others carried forward. Neville's words later, in the Room of Requirement, summed it up. "You didn't abandon us. You gave us something to fight for." That single line redefined the trio's decision. They hadn't fled. They had lit the fuse, and the explosion was coming. In the end, their return to Hogwarts wasn't as students, but as warriors. When Harry re-entered the castle through Ariana's portrait, the battle was already underway. Death Eaters had breached the gates, giants roared beyond the walls, and hundreds of students rallied, not because they were told, but because they believed, and they believed because Harry, Ron, and Hermione had gone first. Their unauthorized departure had changed the rules. They redefined what resistance looked like. It wasn't about staying behind locked doors or waiting for adults to lead. It was about risking everything for the future of others. And when the dust settled and Voldemort fell, history remembered them not as deserters, but as heroes. Still, it's worth remembering that their path was carved from a decision that many would have considered foolish, perhaps even criminal. The line between bravery and recklessness is razor thin, and at the end of 6th year, 3 teenagers crossed it without hesitation. But that's what made them extraordinary. They did not wait to be told what to do. They listened to their conscience. And in doing so, they didn't just run from Hogwarts, they ran toward destiny. Number 23. Using magic outside of school. It was a warm August evening on Privet Drive, the kind of evening when the Muggle world seemed utterly detached from the winds of magic. But that illusion shattered the moment Harry Potter, standing face to face with his bullying cousin Dudley, raised his wand and uttered the words that would echo through the Ministry of Magic like a thunderclap, Expecto Patronum. The silvery stag burst forth, majestic and blinding against the gloom, driving away the soul-sucking chill of the Dementors. Yet what followed wasn't praise for his bravery. It was a formal letter of expulsion. "Dear Mr. Potter," the letter began, "we have received intelligence that you performed the Patronus charm at 23 minutes past 9 this evening in a Muggle-inhabited area and in the presence of a Muggle." The words burned with cold bureaucracy, devoid of understanding or mercy. The law was clear, no underage magic outside of school, and yet how could a wizard like Harry, targeted by dark forces, isolated by guardians who loathed magic, ever be expected to survive without it? The law itself, formerly named the Decree for the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery, was passed in 1875, a time when the Ministry sought to appease growing Muggle suspicions. It forbade the use of magic by witches and wizards under the age of 17 outside a registered educational institution like Hogwarts. But the rule, like many in the magical world, lived in the tension between theory and practice, and no trio challenged its boundaries more than Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Before the Dementor attack, Harry had already brushed against this rule during the summer after his first year. After Dobby, the mischievous yet well-meaning house elf, used a hover charm to smash Petunia Dursley's prized pudding, it was Harry who received the Ministry's warning. We would also ask you to remember that any further spell work on your part may lead to your expulsion from said school. It was unjust, absurd even. The Ministry didn't seem to care who cast the magic, only where it happened and in whose house the magic registered. Since underage witches and wizards weren't tracked by individual spells, the law assumed the worst. This flawed enforcement meant that technically any magic occurring in a Muggle household would be blamed on the underage wizard present. Dobby's prank turned into a bureaucratic nightmare for Harry. One might ask, how could a law so blindly enforced claim to protect the secrecy of magic? In Harry's case, it only isolated him further, sending a message: your survival comes second to protocol. When Harry cast the Patronus in Order of the Phoenix, he wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting Dudley, his tormentor, from a fate worse than death. Dementors feed on despair, and Dudley, for all his cruelty, was utterly unprepared. The Ministry's reaction was swift and ruthless. Harry was summoned to a full disciplinary hearing as though he were an adult wizard on trial for dark magic. The irony, of course, was that the very institution accusing him of endangering Muggles was the one endangering him by stationing Dementors in Little Whinging in the first place. Even Dumbledore, the most powerful and respected wizard alive, had to wrestle with this unjust interpretation of magical law. At the trial, he intervened not with sentiment, but with strategy. The law clearly states that magic may be used before Muggles in exceptional circumstances, and I believe that facing two Dementors qualifies, he said. His calm voice silenced the room, but it was a near miss, had it not been for Mrs. Figg's testimony. They were big, and wearing cloaks. Harry could have been expelled, all for defending his life. Ron Weasley, of course, found the whole situation both terrifying and hilarious. Blimey, Harry, they tried to expel you for saving your own life. And yet, Ron himself had no qualms about bending the rule when necessity called. During the summer before their second year, it was Ron who, unable to contact Harry through traditional magical means, commandeered his father's flying car to rescue him from the Dursleys. Driving an enchanted vehicle across the British countryside was a clear violation of wizarding law, not only the underage magic ban, but also the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Act. Yet Ron's moral compass pointed elsewhere: loyalty, friendship, and doing what needed to be done. Hermione Granger, on the other hand, treated magical law with the reverence of someone who respected systems, until those systems failed her. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she used a time-turner, a device so powerful it was strictly regulated by the Department of Mysteries. Although she was granted permission to use it for academic reasons, she and Harry later used it to break Sirius Black out of his tower cell. That act was a flagrant misuse of magic, even if it saved an innocent man and a hippogriff from death. "Doesn't time travel mess with the whole universe?" Ron had asked. Hermione answered with a simple, "We're not supposed to be seen." Rules, in the end, were guidelines, ones that bent when morality demanded it. Even the highly capable Hermione wasn't above casting spells during the summer holiday. In Half-Blood Prince, she confessed to using magic to protect her home. "I've put some protective spells around the house, not very powerful ones, just enough to give me a bit of warning." The war was creeping into their lives, and Hogwarts couldn't protect them forever. Waiting for the Ministry's permission became a luxury they couldn't afford. The hypocrisy of the law was even more evident when we consider that the Weasley twins had been brewing trouble long before they came of age. Fred and George were infamous for testing their magical inventions at home. Their skiving snack boxes, extendable ears, and portable swamps all stemmed from underage experimentation. No ministry owl ever showed up at the burrow to reprimand them. Perhaps the enchantments of a magical home clouded detection, or perhaps the ministry simply looked the other way when the magic occurred in a wizarding household. Harry's case was unique in its cruelty because he lived among muggles. The ministry, unable to differentiate spell signatures, flagged every incident in his vicinity. This created a constant state of fear and restraint, and yet, even with this sword hanging over his head, Harry never hesitated to use magic when lives were on the line. "What was I supposed to do?" he asked, in Order of the Phoenix. "Let them suck the soul out of me and Dudley." Later in the same book, when the trio escaped from the ministry with a stolen prophecy orb, they used magic freely, stunning curses, shield charms, and disarming spells without regard for their underage status. The rules had lost their meaning. The war was here. By Deathly Hallows, all pretense of legality had evaporated. The trio operated as full-fledged magical fugitives. Their tent was protected by enchantments. Hermione cast Protego Totalum, Repello Muggletum, and Muffliato without hesitation. "We've got to protect ourselves," she told Harry. "There's no one else." And indeed, the ministry had fallen to Death Eaters. The law had become a weapon in the hands of tyrants. Using magic was no longer a question of legality, it was a matter of survival. This descent into lawlessness wasn't a betrayal of their values, it was a logical progression. The ministry had failed to uphold justice, and the young wizards took justice into their own hands. When they infiltrated Gringotts to retrieve a Horcrux, Hermione performed a complex Polyjuice potion transformation and cast a series of Confundus charms, all illegal, all necessary. Even back in their earlier years, when they weren't under the shadow of war, the trio had a pragmatic approach to rules. In Chamber of Secrets, Ron and Harry used Polyjuice potion, an advanced and restricted brew, to impersonate Crabbe and Goyle. Hermione brewed it herself, working out of a bathroom stall. "It's the only way we'll find out the truth," she said. They weren't rebels for the sake of rebellion. They were seekers of truth in a world that preferred silence. And who could forget Goblet of Fire, where Harry was entered into a life-threatening tournament against his will? He didn't cast a single illegal spell, but the very structure of the Triwizard Tournament violated the spirit of underage protections. The ministry watched a boy perform dangerous magic for entertainment, then had the audacity to investigate him later for a Patronus. Through all of this, one pattern is clear. The law forbidding underage magic was not inherently evil, but it was often applied in a way that ignored the complexity of human and magical circumstances. Its blind spots were exploited by those in power, and its rigidity punished those in need. Even the most minor infractions reveal the tension. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore casually apparated with Harry out of Privet Drive. Apparition was a magical form of transportation that Harry was not legally permitted to attempt until he came of age. Yet Dumbledore performed it without concern for bureaucratic repercussions. Why? Because in his view, context outweighed statute. "Sometimes," Dumbledore had once said, "you have to choose between what is right and what is easy." And for young witches and wizards navigating a world far more dangerous than the ministry understood, that choice often required magic, regardless of their age. As the war reached its climax and Voldemort's grip tightened, the question of legal versus illegal magic became laughable. The taboo on speaking his name triggered tracking spells. The ministry itself was infiltrated. Children had to grow up fast. The very law that was designed to protect magical children became irrelevant in a world where survival meant learning how to cast a shield charm before your first heartbreak. In the end, Harry, Ron, and Hermione didn't just break the rule about underage magic, they rendered it obsolete. Their journey transformed them from students to soldiers, from curious learners to defenders of the light. And through every wand flick and whispered incantation, they reminded us that the real power of magic lies not in permission, but in purpose. Number 24. Breaking into Gringotts. There are moments in magical history that defy logic, legality, and every known sense of self-preservation. Among them stands one reckless, brilliant, and unthinkably dangerous operation: the infiltration of Gringotts' wizarding bank by 3 teenagers, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley. Disguised, desperate, and armed with more courage than caution, they didn't just break a few rules that day. They shattered the very boundaries of magical law. It wasn't mischief, it wasn't rebellion, it was an act of war. Gringotts was no ordinary institution. Its vaults, buried deep beneath Diagon Alley, were protected by ancient enchantments, lethal curses, and the most formidable guards known to the magical world, goblins. No one, not even the most skilled adult witches or wizards, would dare to enter its depths uninvited. As Rubeus Hagrid once warned young Harry, Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything you want to keep safe, except maybe Hogwarts. That made what Harry and his friends did not just exceptional. It was unprecedented. Their target, Vault 687, the Lestrange family vault, not because they sought treasure, but because deep within it, protected by generations of dark magic, lay a Horcrux, one of the final pieces of Lord Voldemort's fractured soul. The stakes were apocalyptic, and yet the plan was absurdly fragile. It began, as many questionable plans do, with Polyjuice potion. Hermione became Bellatrix Lestrange, the notorious Death Eater. Ron was disguised with stubble and a foreign accent. Harry, under his invisibility cloak, carried the weight of invisibility and command. Their entrance into Gringotts was a masterclass in magical subterfuge. "Madame Lestrange?" the Goblin Griphook asked, his voice uncertain, as Hermione swayed forward in her stolen persona. Her hands shook, her voice was all wrong. Bellatrix, the real Bellatrix, would never tremble, but Griphook, a reluctant ally whom the trio had coerced into helping them navigate the bank's traps, intervened at just the right moment. "She is not well," he snapped. "We must proceed quickly." For a moment, the ruse held, but Gringotts was built to reveal lies. The further they descended, through twisting stone tunnels and along cart tracks that sped like bolts through the earth, the more they stepped into a world not meant for the living. As they approached the Lestrange vault, they were met with the first true horror: the thief's downfall. A waterfall that stripped away enchantments. It surged over them, and with it vanished the Polyjuice disguises. Bellatrix was gone. Hermione stood exposed, soaked and shivering. Their deception had seconds to live, but it was not just enchantments that Gringotts used to protect its riches. It was psychology. Inside the vault, they were met with the multiplying curse. Every object touched became scorching hot and rapidly reproduced. "Get it and get out," Harry shouted. They clawed through the gold, the jewels, the artifacts. Somewhere among the growing mountain of burning treasure was the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, a vessel of dark magic and history. Hermione screamed as a chalice seared her palm. "There!" Griphook hissed. In that moment, alliances broke like glass. Griphook, who had agreed to help them in exchange for the sword of Gryffindor, seized the blade and betrayed them. "Thieves!" he shrieked, and vanished into the chaos. Sirens wailed, goblins surged forward, the vault slammed shut behind them. There was no path left but madness. Harry made the only choice he could. In the chaos, as the trio fled through the tunnels, they stumbled upon a chained beast, a creature of legend and cruelty, a dragon, blind, scarred, and tortured, bred for terror. "We ride it," Harry said. Ron choked. "We what?" There was no room for hesitation. They mounted the creature, loosed its chains with spells, and with a roar that shook the very bones of the earth, the dragon burst upward, smashing through tunnels, walls, and ceiling. The dragon's escape through the roof of Gringotts was a moment of myth. Wizards and witches in Diagon Alley scattered as a monstrous white form exploded into the sky, 3 riders clinging to its back. "It's them!" someone screamed, but it was too late. They were airborne, bloodied, burned, and alive. This was no childish escapade. It was an act that, in any normal circumstance, would result in a life sentence in Azkaban. The trio had assaulted one of the most secure banks in the wizarding world. They had impersonated a known Death Eater, broken into a high-security vault, stolen a powerful magical object, and unleashed a dragon into the skies above London. It was international magical terrorism, made by teenagers. But in the context of war, laws become blurred. The real power of this moment lies not in the chaos they caused, but in what it represented. Harry, Ron, and Hermione weren't seeking gold or fame. They were destroying the foundations of Voldemort's immortality. And to do that, they had to become outlaws. As Sirius Black once said, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. Sometimes good people must cross lines. The use of Bellatrix's wand, which Harry had taken from her during their previous confrontation, added another layer of danger. Gringotts goblins recognized not just her face, but her magical signature. The wand chooses the wizard. As Ollivander famously said, using another's wand was unpredictable, yet the deception worked. For a while. It was a deadly gamble, one they never fully controlled. Hermione's performance as Bellatrix was painfully awkward, yet compelling. She trembled with fear, a stark contrast to the real Lestrange's icy malice. If she was here, Ron whispered later, we'd be dead already. But the goblins, wary of Voldemort's fury, did not question too deeply. Fear gave them a window, but it didn't hold. As the dragon burst into daylight, its wings flinging rubble across London, Harry felt a strange mixture of triumph and guilt. The creature had been abused, shackled underground for decades. Now it was free. Its deafening roar shook the skies. "We did that," Hermione whispered, clinging to the scales. "We freed it." Not all victories come in golden wrappers. Some come covered in ash and fire. Gringotts never truly recovered from the break-in. For generations, the goblins had ruled the underworld of wizard finance. But after this, after 3 school-age children had outwitted their centuries-old defenses, the myth of their invulnerability cracked. Whispers spread in wizarding pubs and alleys. If Gringotts could fall, what else might? Of course, Harry's mind was never on legacy. Even as they soared into the clouds, the weight of the Horcrux in his bag pulled at him like an anchor. One step closer to ending Voldemort. But how many more to go? Each victory came at cost, trust, safety, and pieces of their humanity. Ron's hand bled from the vault's curses. Hermione's voice trembled when she spoke. And Harry? Harry looked older than he had hours before. Later, when questioned about the event, goblins would mutter the name Potter with a mix of awe and fury. It was dishonor, one claimed. He used goblin help and betrayed it. Another whispered, he freed the dragon. Perhaps he understands our chains. The truth lay somewhere in between. The trio had crossed a line, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was the only path left. The stolen cup, Helga Hufflepuff's relic, held more than just dark magic. It was a symbol of Voldemort's corruption of legacy and purity. For Harry, it was one more step toward ending the war, but for the goblins it was a betrayal they would never forget. This chapter of their journey marked a turning point, not just in the war, but in who they were becoming. No longer students, no longer even rebels. They were soldiers. The world they returned to was darker, heavier. The dragon, now a tiny speck in the sky, carried them not toward freedom, but toward the final battles of their lives. The break-in at Gringotts is often remembered for its cinematic flair, the disguises, the vault, the dragon. But beneath the spectacle lay desperation, sacrifice, and a choice to abandon safety for justice. Few would have done the same, fewer still would have survived, and in the end, when the story was told, when children asked how the Dark Lord was defeated, someone would whisper, they rode a dragon out of Gringotts. And that perhaps is all that needs to be said. Number 25, violating magical creature handling rules. Of all the curious twists in the second year of Harry Potter's journey through the magical world, few are as chilling and as legally questionable as the encounter with Aragog, the monstrous acromantula hidden deep within the Forbidden Forest. What began as a cryptic suggestion from Hagrid to follow the spiders became an unlawful and life-threatening adventure that no second-year student at Hogwarts should have been part of. Yet the Ministry of Magic never formally addressed it. What does this reveal about magical law enforcement and the casual risks faced by young wizards? When Harry and Ron received Hagrid's message, they knew it wasn't just a whim. The advice came at a dark moment. Hagrid had just been taken to Azkaban under suspicion of having opened the Chamber of Secrets. Before his departure, he left one vital clue. If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. As far as cryptic clues go, this one was more unsettling than vague. Spiders had been seen fleeing the castle in unnatural lines ever since the attacks on Muggle-born students began. It wasn't a leap of logic to believe the spiders were reacting to a threat older than themselves, something primeval that had returned to Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic has explicit guidelines in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Among them is the prohibition against engaging with classified X-rated beasts, especially acromantulas. These creatures are considered untrainable and extremely dangerous. The acromantula breeding ban of 1965 stands as a stark warning. The acromantula is a monstrous, eight-eyed spider capable of human speech. Believed to be native to the rainforests of Southeast Asia, it is carnivorous and prefers large prey. Acromantulas are not to be bred or kept under any circumstances. Yet deep in the Forbidden Forest, Harry and Ron stumbled into a thriving colony of these beasts. They didn't simply observe them from afar, they spoke to Aragog, the patriarch of the Horde, who shared a long history with Hagrid and even gave them pivotal information. This went far beyond the scope of innocent curiosity. It was a clear violation of both the school's safety protocols and ministry law. Students, especially ones as young as 12, had no business being in that part of the forest, let alone having an audience with a creature that had no qualms about devouring them. The danger was real. J.K. Rowling's text leaves no room for doubt. "I do not deny," he said, and a louder clicking noise made Harry and Ron shiver, "that I eat humans." Aragog made it clear that he only spared them because of his old loyalty to Hagrid. But his children, wild and numerous, were not bound by that promise. "But I will not deny them fresh meat when it wanders so willingly into our midst," Aragog added with brutal honesty. At that moment, the spiders advanced, and had it not been for the miraculous arrival of the enchanted Ford Anglia, the story might have ended in a carnage fit for the prophet's front page. How is it, then, that no disciplinary action followed, not from the school, not from the ministry? Hogwarts, a school with a caretaker who once tried to expel Harry for dripping mud in the corridor, somehow overlooked 2 students wandering into a den of lethal monsters. More perplexing still, the Forbidden Forest was always meant to be off-limits, except under staff supervision, and even then only in groups. Yet Harry and Ron had gone in at night, without permission, in the wake of multiple petrifications. This wasn't bravery, it was anarchy. One might argue they were driven by desperation. The school was on the brink of closure. Hermione was petrified. Hagrid, who they trusted implicitly, had been unfairly incarcerated. But intent does not excuse action. If a similar stunt had occurred in the Muggle world, a child breaking into a zoo enclosure of man-eating animals, it would have made national news and led to arrests. Here, it's treated as a rite of passage. It's worth considering the roots of this leniency. Hagrid's affection for magical creatures, especially dangerous ones, is legendary but often problematic. From his illegal dragon egg in the first year to Buckbeak's incident in the third, Hagrid walks the line between compassion and recklessness. Aragog was no exception. Raised in the castle and released into the forest when danger became apparent, Aragog's presence was never reported to the ministry. Hagrid never registered him. This, in itself, is a serious breach of magical law. Yet Dumbledore, who must have known about the acromantula, chose to look the other way. In that light, Harry and Ron's actions were not an isolated incident, but a symptom of Hogwarts' broader culture of rule-bending. Students are encouraged to be brave, resourceful, and independent. But when bravery places them face to face with a species known for human predation, it stops being admirable and starts being criminal. Hogwarts has always operated as an institution outside the typical bounds of wizarding bureaucracy, but its tolerance for dangerous escapades borders on negligence. Still, one can't dismiss the outcome. Aragog confirmed what Harry had suspected. The creature that was killing students wasn't him. The attacks weren't coming from the forest, they were coming from inside the castle. The monster wasn't an acromantula, it was something far older, something hidden in the plumbing of Hogwarts for generations. "The monster of Slytherin," Aragog whispered, "was born in the castle. I came from a distant land." This truth may never have been uncovered had Harry and Ron obeyed the rules. This places us in an ethical grey area. Does breaking the law become justified if the outcome is good? Should young wizards be encouraged to ignore regulations in the name of truth? The Ministry's silence suggests that results may, at times, excuse the method. But that's a dangerous precedent, especially when children are involved. It suggests that in the wizarding world, the ends can justify the means, so long as nobody dies. It's also a reflection on wizarding culture and how it views magical creatures. There's a strange duality at play. On one hand, creatures like acromantulas are classified as too dangerous to interact with. On the other hand, Hogwarts keeps Thestrals in its stables and centaurs in its forest. The Forbidden Forest itself is home to unicorns, werewolves, and Aragog's descendants. Rather than being a sanctuary or a nature reserve, it's a chaotic dumping ground for everything too dangerous to live elsewhere. And yet the school borders it. Hagrid's role is central to this contradiction. His love for Aragog is never portrayed as evil, only misunderstood. Aragog never hurt no one, never, Hagrid insists in Chamber of Secrets. But Aragog himself admits to eating humans. This dissonance shows how emotional bias can cloud judgment. Hagrid didn't see a predator, he saw a friend. Harry, raised in the Muggle world, had a more instinctive reaction, fear. And he was right. After their return from the forest, Harry and Ron never received punishment. There was no reprimand, no detention, nothing. It was as though the event had been wiped clean. Perhaps it was. With Dumbledore reinstated, Lucius Malfoy disgraced, and the Chamber of Secrets closed, there was little appetite for bureaucratic fallout. But imagine another child copying their actions a year later, without a magical car to save them. The Ministry's inaction becomes not just negligent but deadly. This also speaks volumes about how laws are enforced in the wizarding world. Enforcement seems to depend more on political climate than on written code. When Cornelius Fudge wants to appear decisive, he arrests Hagrid. When things return to normal, all is forgiven and forgotten. If the rules are so flexible, are they really rules at all? Even more troubling is the lack of follow-up. Aragog's colony remained in the forest. No Ministry team came to investigate. No containment measures were taken. The forest continued to house creatures who would gladly kill the next lost student. Aragog eventually dies in Half-Blood Prince, but his children are still there, and Hagrid, mourning his old friend, still sees no fault in what he allowed to grow. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is the normalization of danger at Hogwarts. The school teaches transfiguration, potions and charms, but offers no class on creature law. Young witches and wizards aren't taught how to report illegal creatures. They aren't even warned about the penalties for engaging them. Harry and Ron didn't just ignore the rules. They were never truly educated about them. That failure rests on the school's shoulders. Years later, when Harry becomes head of the Aura office, one must wonder what he thought about the laws he once broke. Did he enforce the same rules he ignored as a student? Did he finally understand why the law forbade contact with creatures like Aragog? Or did he, like Hagrid, believe that intentions mattered more than codes? The story of Aragog and the spiders is not just a footnote in a schoolboy's tale. It's a mirror held up to the wizarding world's casual relationship with its own laws. Harry and Ron stepped into a den of death, defied magical legislation, and walked away heroes. But not everyone would have. Not everyone had a flying car waiting for them. Not everyone was the boy who lived. Number 26, participating in unauthorized duels. From the very start of Harry Potter's first year at Hogwarts, it became evident that dueling was more than just a classroom exercise, it was a matter of survival. Although the school's rules clearly prohibited unsupervised magical combat, Harry and his friends repeatedly found themselves locked in dangerous, unsanctioned battles. Whether in secret rooms, shadowy corridors, or forest clearings, they learned to wield their wands in ways no standard syllabus could ever teach. The first taste of unsupervised magical combat came surprisingly early. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Draco Malfoy challenged Harry to a midnight duel boasting, "Midnight wizard's duel, wands only, no contact." Although the duel never occurred, Malfoy fled and left Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville to be caught by Filch. The scene marked the beginning of a pattern, dueling as rebellion, defiance and preparation. For Harry, this wasn't a game, it was training. As the years passed, the stakes of these duels increased. By their second year, the trio had already faced a fully grown mountain troll and a basilisk. Harry's combat instincts were sharpened by necessity. In his third year, he didn't just face Dementors, but also practiced spells like the Patronus charm outside of normal curriculum. Professor Lupin gave him permission, yes, but it was still an example of Harry taking his magical education beyond the rules, learning not because he was told to, but because he had to. One of the most vivid examples of unsanctioned dueling came during the rise of Dumbledore's army in Order of the Phoenix. Driven by frustration at Umbridge's refusal to teach practical defense, Hermione suggested creating a secret group to practice real magic. Harry became the de facto instructor, and the Room of Requirement became their underground dojo. Here, they honed spells like Expelliarmus, Stupefy, and even Reducto, which shattered a table during Ginny's first attempt. These weren't mock duels, they were simulations of war. It's worth noting that none of this was done without risk. The very idea of practicing such powerful magic without supervision was dangerous. But the students of Dumbledore's army understood something vital. When dark forces rise, rules can become luxuries. As Hermione once said, you can't break an unbreakable vow, but you can break school rules. And they did, often, for good reason. During these sessions, Harry proved himself not just a teacher, but a duelist of remarkable instinct. His training in the Room of Requirement paid off when the inquisitorial squad, led by Malfoy, tried to capture the group. Harry disarmed several attackers with near-perfect reflexes, but it was not just about spells, it was about reading movement, reacting to fear, and trusting one's instincts. It was combat magic in its rawest form. Perhaps the most intense and defining unsupervised duel happened in Half-Blood Prince, when Harry used Sectum Sempra on Draco Malfoy in the boys' bathroom. There was no warning, no teacher present, and no understanding of the spell's true consequences. Blood spurted from Malfoy's face and chest as though he had been slashed with an invisible sword, the book reads. This moment showed the dark side of self-taught magic. What begins as power can become violence when left unchecked. That duel, if it can be called that, left Harry shaken. He had only wanted to win to silence Malfoy, but the result was near fatal. Snape's intervention saved Draco's life, but the guilt haunted Harry. The spell had come from the Half-Blood Prince's book, and for the first time, Harry questioned the morality of the tools he had chosen to learn. It wasn't always about being ready for battle. Sometimes it was about knowing what you should never do, even in a duel. Not all unsupervised duels ended in blood. Some became acts of resistance. In Deathly Hallows, the battle in the corridors of Hogwarts saw students like Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, and Luna Lovegood fighting side by side. They were no longer children learning spells, they were soldiers defending their home. The rules had long been shattered. "We're his army now," said Neville, standing in the ruins of the Room of Requirement, wand at the ready. This battle wasn't just dramatic, it was necessary. The Carrows Death Eaters placed at Hogwarts used Crucio as punishment. Against such brutality, the students had no choice but to fight. Duels broke out in classrooms, dormitories, and hallways. This wasn't a game of points or house cups. This was a full-scale rebellion waged by children forced to grow up too fast. The idea of sanctioned versus unsanctioned magic became blurry. Who was truly in the wrong? Students who practiced defense to survive, or teachers like Umbridge and the Carrows who enforced silence and submission? The Ministry had turned Hogwarts into a cage. The students, with their defiant duels and whispered training sessions, tore through its bars. Some duels became legendary among students. Fred and George Weasley, for example, launched fireworks that attacked Umbridge's regime, not with violence, but with brilliance. Accidental magic does happen when young wizards are emotional, McGonagall once said, but in this case it was deliberate rebellion. Their escape was a duel of defiance, leaving behind chaos and hope. Then there's the unforgettable confrontation in Deathly Hallows when Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned to Hogwarts to face Voldemort's forces. The entire school transformed into a battlefield. Students from all houses, yes, even Slytherins like Slughorn and Zabini, took sides. Every corridor was a dueling ground. Every stairwell was a front line. It was a culmination of every lesson learned in the shadows. Take the moment when Professor McGonagall, flanked by Molly Weasley and Kingsley Shacklebolt, engaged in a 3-on-1 duel against Voldemort. Although not students, this scene mirrored everything the younger generation had been preparing for. Years of unsanctioned practice led to this, a school united in combat. Dueling wasn't just tolerated anymore, it was embraced. Throughout the series, dueling also became a language, a way of understanding one another. When Harry faced Snape at the end of Half-Blood Prince, shouting, "Fight back, you coward!" It wasn't just an insult, it was a plea, a final test. And Snape, with all his layered allegiances, refused, not because he was weak, but because he still cared. Even duels have meaning beneath the spells. Ironically, the only official dueling club formed by Gilderoy Lockhart failed miserably. His incompetence turned the session into chaos. Draco summoned a snake, Harry spoke Parseltongue, and the whole event descended into confusion. It was a reminder that not all dueling is productive. Intent and understanding matter. Without them, it's just chaos in robes. In contrast, Harry's duel with Bellatrix Lestrange at the Department of Mysteries showed raw emotion and skill. She mocked him, taunted him, and danced between his spells. "You have to mean it, Potter," Voldemort would later say about using the Cruciatus Curse. But Harry couldn't. He had power, but not cruelty. And that made all the difference. It was a duel of principle. Ron and Hermione were no strangers to combat either. Hermione's duels were quick, clever, and precise, like when she stunned Death Eaters in the Ministry with surgical timing. Ron's were more chaotic, but effective. Their loyalty to Harry pulled them into every fight he faced. They didn't just support him, they stood between him and death more times than one could count. Ultimately, the rules at Hogwarts weren't written for wartime. They were designed for a peaceful world where students learned potions and charms without fear. But Harry's generation lived in different times. Their duels, whether in bathrooms, forest clearings, or collapsing corridors, weren't acts of rebellion. They were acts of necessity. "Every great wizard in history has started out as nothing more than we are now," said Harry to Dumbledore's army. "If they can do it, why not us?" That question, echoing in the stone walls of Hogwarts, carried them through every unsanctioned battle. The duels may not have been permitted, but they prepared them for a world that demanded courage, not permission. Number 27, secret use of portkeys. It all began with a boot, a grimy, forgotten object lying innocently in the long grass atop Stoteshead Hill. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing more than rubbish. But to Harry Potter and the others gathered that chilly summer morning, it was a portal, an enchanted key to transport them miles away in a blink. This, the first time Harry encountered a portkey, was a moment laced with wonder and confusion. "It's a portkey," Mr. Weasley explained. "Objects that are used to transport wizards from one spot to another at a prearranged time." The concept was simple. Any ordinary object could become extraordinary so long as it was imbued with the right magic. But the consequences of using such objects without care without planning, would become horrifyingly clear before the year was done. The Triwizard Tournament was meant to be a symbol of unity, a celebration of magical cooperation between Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. But its final challenge turned that promise on its head. When Harry and Cedric Diggory reached the Triwizard Cup, it gleamed under the starlight like a trophy waiting to be claimed. "Take it together," Cedric said, breathless from the race through the maze. And so they did, each grasping a handle, their faces lit with victory. But the cup was no longer what it appeared. It had been tampered with. In the instant they touched it, the world disappeared in a swirl of colour and sound. Harry felt as though a hook just behind his navel had been suddenly jerked irresistibly forward. That familiar line from Goblet of Fire captures the brutal disorientation of portkey travel. But it would be nothing compared to what lay ahead. They arrived not at a stage or a winner's platform, but in a graveyard, a place of death, Cedric's death. What made that moment so jarring wasn't just the murder, it was the subversion of safety. Portkeys, tools typically used for coordinated transport, had become instruments of a deadly trap. Voldemort had turned a simple magical object into a weapon. This act shattered the illusion that portkeys were safe, predictable, or even neutral. They could be bent, corrupted, used to transport not just bodies, but destinies. The fallout from that night left deep scars, but it also forced a question into the heart of the magical world. How much power can you place in an object when that object can betray you? At Hogwarts, Dumbledore wasted no time in reinforcing the rules. Portkeys could only be used with explicit approval from the headmaster and the ministry. Their use was tightly regulated. Official portkeys had to be registered, no exceptions. In a world where transportation spells like apparition were restricted by age and skill, portkeys presented a tempting alternative, but one wrapped in bureaucracy and caution. Of course, Harry Potter and caution rarely met in the same room. In Deathly Hallows, when the Ministry falls under Death Eater control, Harry, Ron, and Hermione infiltrate its halls disguised by Polyjuice potion. Their mission: retrieve one of Voldemort's Horcruxes from within the clutches of Dolores Umbridge herself. The operation is messy, chaotic. Alarms blare, panic erupts, and just when things seem most desperate, Hermione acts. She grabs an enchanted paperweight, an emergency portkey they had arranged beforehand, and shouts the activation word. A second later, they're gone. Harry felt the familiar jerking sensation behind his navel. The world went blurry and then cleared again. Unlike the graveyard, this escape was controlled, deliberate, but the desperation still clung to them. The trio had bypassed the rules not out of ignorance but necessity. The Ministry would never have authorized their mission. The situation required action without permission, and so they made their own rules. This is a recurring theme in the series. Magic used outside its sanctioned limits, often for good, often under pressure. Portkeys become symbols not just of transportation, but of rebellion, of evasion, of freedom. In another unforgettable moment, the trio uses a portkey from the grounds of Malfoy Manor. They are beaten, broken, and desperate. Dobby, the brave, trembling house elf, manages to grab them all and activate a stolen portkey, rescuing them from the clutches of Bellatrix Lestrange. The cost is Dobby's life. But the success of the escape illustrates again how portkeys, while bound by laws, bend to those willing to risk everything. "Dobby has come to rescue Harry Potter and his friends," he said, eyes wide and glowing with pride. That moment became a turning point. Not only had the portkey saved lives, it reminded us that even the smallest among us could wield powerful magic when guided by loyalty and love. At Hogwarts, however, such magic remained restricted. The castle, cloaked in ancient enchantments, was nearly impervious to unauthorized portkey use. Dumbledore, ever the guardian of balance between freedom and order, allowed portkeys only under exceptional circumstances. When he arranged for Harry to travel with him to find the Horcrux in the seaside cave, he used apparition. Why? Perhaps because even the headmaster himself recognized that portkeys were too easily manipulated. Yet it was Dumbledore who, in Order of the Phoenix, gave the green light for a portkey to be used in the Department of Mysteries incident. "Take this," he said to Harry, handing him a blackened coin. "It's a portkey back to Hogwarts." Dumbledore had prepared for failure. He knew the children might face something beyond their control. The portkey wasn't just a backup, it was a lifeline. But these controlled uses stand in stark contrast to how Harry and his friends wield portkeys in later years. They never ask for permission, they don't consult the Ministry. They move like guerrilla fighters, shifting from place to place, often with little more than instinct to guide them. It is reckless, it is dangerous, but it is also necessary. The war has made the rules irrelevant. This raises a philosophical question. Is magic inherently neutral, or does its morality lie in how it's used? Portkeys, like wands, potions, or spells, respond to the intent of the user. They carry no allegiance. When Harry uses a portkey, it is often with good intentions, but intentions don't always prevent disaster. Take the case of Barty Crouch Jr. masquerading as Mad-Eye Moody. He creates the Triwizard Cup portkey that lures Harry to Voldemort. But even more chilling is how easily he does it. A teacher, trusted by the school, uses the privilege to turn a harmless object into a death trap. The simplicity of this transformation is what makes it so dangerous. If a portkey can be anything, then anything can be a threat. This paranoia resurfaces in Deathly Hallows when the Order of the Phoenix uses portkeys during the escape from Privet Drive. Multiple decoys are launched, each portkey to a safe house. But even with these precautions, the plan nearly fails. Mad-Eye Moody dies, George Weasley is maimed. Portkeys, even when used correctly, cannot account for betrayal or bad luck. The portkey is unique among magical transportations because of its impersonality. Apparition requires skill and confidence. Floo powder needs access to a network. Broomsticks demand stamina. But a portkey is passive. It moves you whether you're ready or not. This makes it perfect for both rescue and ambush. The same magic that can save can also destroy. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione plan their break-in at Gringotts, they consider a portkey as an escape route. It's Bill Weasley who arranges it. "You'll need a portkey out. I'll get one authorized." This is one of the rare moments in the series where the use of a portkey follows legal channels. But even then, the chaos of the escape renders rules meaningless. The trio barely makes it out alive. Rules, it seems, are for peacetime. Interestingly, portkeys are never romanticized in the books. They are tools, blunt and uncomfortable. Unlike the elegance of flight or the thrill of apparition, portkey travel is always described as nauseating, abrupt, and painful. Harry felt as though he had been pulled through a long rubber tube. These descriptions reinforce the fact that portkeys are practical, not poetic. They are the magic of necessity, and yet they are often the magic of last resort. In the world of Harry Potter, portkeys mark pivotal moments: Cedric's death, the escape from the Ministry, the rescue from Malfoy Manor, the infiltration of Gringotts. Each time they signify a turning point. They do not merely move bodies, they alter the course of the story. Portkeys also highlight the tension between control and chaos. The Ministry regulates them, Dumbledore authorizes them, but Harry uses them without rules. This tension reflects a broader theme in the series: the rebellion of youth against the structures of authority. In their hands, the portkey becomes a symbol of resistance. One might wonder, why don't more wizards use them casually? The answer is in the risk. Portkeys require trust that they will bring you to the right place at the right time. In a world riddled with deception, trust is dangerous. As Voldemort proved, the object you think will save you might lead you straight to your grave. And yet again and again, Harry and his friends return to them. They rely on portkeys not because they're safe, but because they're fast. In a war, speed is life. Decisions must be made in seconds. Permission cannot be sought. In this way, the trio mirrors the improvisational courage of soldiers in resistance movements throughout history. They use what they can, how they can. By the final chapters of the saga, portkeys have lost their novelty. They are no longer magical marvels, but tools of survival. And perhaps that's the point. In the world of Harry Potter, even the most wondrous things can become weapons or shields, depending on who holds them. As the dust settles after Voldemort's final defeat, one imagines portkeys returning to the realm of rules and regulations. But their legacy, marked by urgency and desperation, remains. For Harry, the memory of that first jolt, the graveyard, Cedric's fall, the moment when innocence was ripped away, will never fade. Portkeys, in the end, are not just magical artifacts. They are crossroads. They test who you are and who you are willing to become. Number 28. Forging school documents. It happened quietly, almost innocently. A boy with a lightning bolt scar and a girl with frizzy hair huddled in a corner of the Hogwarts library. Between them lay a blank piece of parchment, a bottle of ink, and a trembling feather quill. Hermione Granger's brows were knitted in concentration, while Harry Potter looked over his shoulder, nervous but determined. This wasn't just a school project, it was a forgery, a carefully crafted lie stitched together with perfect cursive and adolescent desperation. The target? None other than the signature of Gilderoy Lockhart, the peacock-haired Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, more interested in his own autograph than actually reading anything he signed. Hermione had studied Lockhart's handwriting with obsessive precision. She had collected samples from his glossy books, his absurd fan mail, and even the notes he left on the blackboard after every self-aggrandizing lesson. Every flourish of the G and every arrogant tilt of the L had been imitated until she could replicate it without hesitation. The result was a forged permission slip addressed to Madame Pince, granting Hermione Granger full access to the restricted section of the library. Signed with the utmost confidence by Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, it read. Lockhart, of course, never saw it. Or rather, he did sign it, but under deception. Hermione had simply thrust the parchment at him during a moment of flattery, rattling off some compliment about his hair or his most recent bestseller. Flattered and distracted, he signed it without reading, thinking it a fan letter or a bookplate. The plan was daring, even reckless. What Hermione and Harry wanted was not merely access to obscure magical theory. They were after a banned book, Moste Potente Potions. It lay there in the restricted section, wrapped in dragon hide and bound with a locking spell that only a signed staff authorization could undo. Within its pages was the recipe for Polyjuice potion, a brew capable of transforming one wizard into another. Brewing it would take a month. Acquiring the book would take 10 seconds of fraud. And they pulled it off, but this wasn't a harmless mischief. Let's call it what it was, academic forgery. A magical form of document fraud involving manipulation, misrepresentation, and unauthorized use of a staff member's credentials. In the non-magical world, such an act, especially involving a teacher's forged signature, would be grounds for immediate expulsion. No hearings, no detentions, just a letter home and the end of a student's academic life. In Hogwarts? It was just another page in the trio's adventures. One might argue that Lockhart's signature was obtained willingly, even if under false pretenses. But isn't that the definition of deception? Hermione engineered a situation where she knew Lockhart wouldn't read what he was signing. "He signs everything," she whispered, a bit smugly in Chamber of Secrets. And he did. It's what made him the perfect target. Hermione didn't merely find a loophole, she exploited a weakness in Lockhart's character for her own ends. The forgery opened doors, literally. The restricted section glowed faintly under torchlight as Harry and Hermione crept between the shelves. Books screamed, books bled, books cursed. But none of that compared to the feeling of guilt, or perhaps thrill they felt, knowing they were handling something dangerous, obtained through deceit. This was no ordinary rule-breaking. This was a calculated criminal act, dressed up in teenage curiosity. And Ron Weasley? He was in on it too, though more as an accomplice than mastermind. He voiced concerns, as usual, but ultimately lent his moral support to the scheme. After all, they were trying to uncover the secret of the Chamber of Secrets and stop the attacks on Muggle-born students. Noble intent, certainly, but does noble intent justify the method? Let's not forget the irony of the situation. While the school was being haunted by a series of petrifications and fear of an ancient evil, 2 second-year students were committing fraud under the very nose of the faculty. Dumbledore, who seemed to know more than he ever let on, surely would have disapproved of this specific tactic. Or would he? That is one of the lingering questions. Did the headmaster quietly condone the rule-breaking of his favoured students, believing the ends justified the means? We must consider the context of Hogwarts itself. Rules were bent and broken constantly. Fred and George Weasley ran an underground joke shop out of their dormitory. Marauders before them crafted the Marauders map by sneaking into Filch's files and likely accessing restricted magical knowledge. The culture of Hogwarts, romanticized as it is, often celebrates mischief when it leads to victory. But should it? If Hermione had been caught, the punishment could have been severe. The restricted section wasn't just restricted for its magical dangers, it was restricted to protect students from dark knowledge they were not ready to handle. Brewing Polyjuice potion as a second year, that's borderline illegal, and in fact, under the Misuse of Magical Substances Act, referenced lightly in Order of the Phoenix, it could be interpreted as an offence if done outside teacher supervision. Let's look at Hermione's motives. Was it bravery, curiosity, or intellectual arrogance? She wanted answers that no professor could give, but instead of appealing honestly, she chose deception. That decision says much about her character at this point. Brilliant, yes, but also willing to sidestep morality in pursuit of what she deems to be a greater goal. This would become a pattern in her future, using the time turner in her third year, brainwashing her own parents before going on the run in the seventh. All done with justification, all done without consent. The moment Harry opened Moste Potente potions, he read the words, "Warning. The use of this potion is strictly forbidden without authorization from the Ministry of Magic." And yet, with a casual shrug, he and Hermione set their plan into motion. The book described not only the brewing process, but the psychological risks, identity confusion, trauma, permanent transformation if brewed improperly. None of it stopped them. Their Polyjuice scheme led to even more broken rules, stealing ingredients from Snape's private stores, lying to staff, and ultimately impersonating fellow students. But it all began with a pen stroke, a signature, a forgery, and once a lie is written into ink, it spreads like poison. What's fascinating is that no teacher ever investigated. Madame Pince accepted the note without hesitation. Lockhart, even if he did remember signing something, was too vain and absent-minded to question how his permission slip ended up in the restricted section. The system failed. Not just the staff, but the entire ethical structure of the school. It was vulnerable to manipulation from a 12-year-old with good penmanship. Even the consequences, transforming into Millicent Bulstrode's cat, in Hermione's case, or nearly being discovered in the Slytherin common room, were brushed off by the story itself. The message? Cleverness outweighs honesty. And while the trio is beloved for their ingenuity, we must ask ourselves, at what cost? In a world where magic flows through everything, where words written on a parchment can trigger enchantments, curses, or unlock forbidden doors, forging a document isn't a prank, it's a spell in itself. It alters reality. Hermione understood that. She weaponized it. And Harry followed because he trusted her more than the rules. The most chilling part? They never got caught, not once, no detention, no questioning, no owl sent home to the Grangers. The act was buried beneath the bigger story of the Basilisk and Tom Riddle's diary. But in real life, such a violation of academic integrity would have left a permanent mark on a student's record. At Hogwarts? It became just another tale told in the Gryffindor common room. By the end of Chamber of Secrets, Hermione was praised for her brilliance, Harry was the hero, and Ron helped save the school. But the forgery was never addressed, never mentioned again. It lingered, silent, like the whisper of a spell not fully undone. And perhaps that's the most dangerous part. When students learn that breaking the rules works and that deception, when smart enough, is invisible. There's a lesson buried here, not in the textbooks but in the margins of the story. That morality in the magical world is often a matter of perspective, that justice bends for heroes, and that sometimes the ink that changes a life isn't on a prophecy or certificate, it's on a forged note passed across a desk, signed by a fool and used by a genius. And still we cheer them on, because it was for the right reasons, because we love Harry and Hermione, because the ends somehow always seem to justify the means at Hogwarts. But for one quiet moment in that candlelit library, they were just two students committing an act of quiet fraud, a crime written in ink, a spell of deception, a moment that changed everything. Number 29, secret use of legitimacy. Harry Potter never officially studied legitimacy, and yet he practiced it, not in the structured wand-waving form Snape had once tried to force into him, but in a raw, instinctive way that bypassed training and tapped directly into the deepest channels of emotion and memory. The connection between Harry and Lord Voldemort was no ordinary link. It was a living, burning thread of consciousness, forged the night a killing curse rebounded and stitched two souls together forever. This was not a case of Harry learning legitimacy. This was a case of Harry becoming it, unknowingly, dangerously, and most of all, secretly. He never told Ron and Hermione the full extent of what he saw. The dreams that made his scar burn weren't just nightmares, they were intrusions, visions, windows into the mind of a killer. In Order of the Phoenix, as Voldemort grew stronger, the connection deepened. Harry began to feel what Voldemort felt. He knew when he was pleased, when he was angry, when he killed, and instead of immediately alerting Dumbledore, who had once warned him to close his mind, Harry kept the knowledge to himself. Take the vision of Arthur Weasley's attack. Harry didn't simply dream about it, he was the snake. He saw through Nagini's eyes as she sank her fangs into Arthur's flesh. "He's dying. He's got to be dying," Harry had shouted in Dumbledore's office. The scene was terrifying, but Harry never told them what was worse, what was hidden behind his panic, that he had enjoyed it, that, for one dark moment, he had felt Voldemort's pleasure. "It was like I was the snake, like I could taste it," he had whispered. Even Dumbledore had flinched. And still Harry didn't stop. Instead of closing his mind as instructed, he let it remain open, sometimes even willingly, not once, not twice, but regularly. It became a way to know what Voldemort was doing, where he was, who he was after. It became a strategy, a secret weapon. And it was dangerous. Dumbledore, in his wisdom, or perhaps his guilt, never punished Harry for this. He urged caution. He assigned Snape to teach him occlumency. But Harry resisted. He hated Snape. He didn't trust him. And most of all, he wanted the connection, because with it, he didn't just feel Voldemort, he understood him. This understanding crossed an invisible line during the Department of Mysteries incident. Voldemort lured Harry with a false vision, Sirius being tortured. It worked because Harry had grown used to trusting what he saw. He never questioned the ethics of using another man's mind, even an evil one. He believed he could handle it, that he was in control, but he wasn't. Sirius died because of that mistake. Still, the lesson didn't take. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry continued to rely on the connection, albeit less frequently. The dreams became more cryptic. Voldemort was growing aware of the link, perhaps even shielding his mind. But Harry still caught glimpses of Grigorovich, of a young Tom Riddle demanding answers. These weren't his memories, but they became part of his own thoughts, mixed into the stew of dreams and dread he carried like a second skin. The ethical dilemma here is profound. Legilimency in the wizarding world is considered a deeply invasive magic. It requires consent. Or at least it should. Snape had snarled once. The mind is not a book to be opened at will and examined at leisure. But that's exactly what Harry did to Voldemort. He invaded, repeatedly. He used the connection not just for survival, but for advantage. There's a moment in Deathly Hallows that reveals just how far Harry was willing to go. As he searched for Horcruxes, he relied on flashes from Voldemort's mind to track them down. He saw Voldemort kill Grindelwald in Nurmengard. He watched him travel to Hogwarts. He witnessed the hiding of the diadem. These visions weren't merely helpful, they were essential. Without them, Harry wouldn't have succeeded. He would have failed, and he knew it. But knowing that something is helpful doesn't make it right. Harry never grappled with the idea that he was, in essence, violating another being's thoughts, that he was reading Voldemort's mind. Not through incantations or spells, but through something far more primal, something darker. He never stopped to ask what it meant for his own soul. Hermione, of all people, should have questioned it, she who always worried about rules and ethics. But she was too busy fighting for their lives, too focused on the mission. Ron, too, never objected. They accepted the connection as part of Harry's burden, part of his destiny. And Harry, he wore it like armor, even when it burned him. There is one chilling moment that perhaps illustrates just how deep this violation went. When Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest to die, he sees into Voldemort's mind once more. He is coming, Voldemort thinks. The boy is coming to die. Harry doesn't flinch. He welcomes it. He wants Voldemort to know their minds are so intertwined that death itself can't sever the bond. And yet, no one ever called it legitimacy, but that's what it was. Pure, unchecked legitimacy. Without wand, without training, without ethics. It wasn't just a power, it was a weapon Harry used in silence. What's more disturbing is that Harry never told anyone the full truth, not even afterward, not in the aftermath of the war. There was no scene where he confesses to the Ministry that he had effectively read Voldemort's thoughts for months. There was no trial, no inquiry, no judgment, because he had won, and victors are rarely punished. Snape, who had practiced legitimacy formally, was feared for it, distrusted, vilified. Even Dumbledore, who likely used it on occasion, was regarded with suspicion by those who knew of it. But Harry? He was the boy who lived, the chosen one. He was given a pass. But should he have been? Let's remember, the use of legitimacy without consent is considered a serious breach of magical ethics. It's tantamount to mental invasion. In Muggle terms, it's like hacking someone's mind, breaking their most sacred boundaries. And Harry, in his quest to defeat Voldemort, did just that. Again and again, he stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back. In Order of the Phoenix, when Dumbledore tells Harry, "You are not sharing his thoughts, you are seeing into his mind," the implication is clear. This is not normal. This is dangerous. But Harry brushes it off. He believes it's part of the prophecy, part of his fate, that the ends justify the means. Even Voldemort in the end tries to use this link against him. He possesses Harry in the Ministry, hoping to break him, to prove that love is not strong enough, but Voldemort fails, and Harry survives. It's a triumph, but one built on the quiet use of a forbidden magic. The books never fully explore the cost of this. They don't dwell on what it meant for Harry's mind, his sanity, his soul, because by the end we're meant to celebrate, to rejoice. The Dark Lord is gone, the world is safe, but the truth remains. Harry Potter walked into another man's thoughts without consent and used them to win a war. Would we forgive anyone else for that? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But the fact that we don't even ask the question is telling. It reveals the blind spot in the narrative, the uncomfortable truth we'd rather ignore, that sometimes even heroes break the rules. And sometimes we let them, because we need them to win. But make no mistake, what Harry did was legitimacy. Not in name, but in nature. And he used it not once, but repeatedly, deliberately, and strategically. The world simply chose to forget, or perhaps to forgive, because history is written by the victors. And the victors do not get punished. Harry's journey with legitimacy is never officially recorded. It isn't listed in the annals of wizarding history. But it happened, and its shadow lingers long after the final spell has been cast. And if you look closely, if you really listen, you might still hear the whispers of a boy who could see through another man's eyes, who wandered into the darkness and came back with fire. Number 30. Aiding a fugitive prisoner. In the dim corridors of the magical world, there are crimes that scream with violence and others that whisper with quiet rebellion. The case of Sirius Black belongs to both. Once branded as the most dangerous prisoner to ever escape Azkaban, his name carried the weight of betrayal, mass murder, and madness. But by the 5th installment of JK. Rowling's saga, Sirius is no longer just the escaped convict. He is godfather, protector, and an uneasy ally, hiding not in the shadows of the forest, but within the very home of the rebellion against Voldemort. What is easily overlooked, though, is the complicity of Harry Potter and his two closest friends, Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, in aiding and abetting a fugitive. It is a quiet crime, almost romanticized in the books, but it deserves a second look. By the time Order of the Phoenix begins, Sirius is living in the ancestral Black home at number 12 Grimold Place. The house has become the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, and Sirius, while still technically a wanted criminal, is no longer entirely in hiding. Yet the Ministry of Magic, headed by Cornelius Fudge, has not absolved him of any crime. To the world outside the Order, Sirius Black remains the escaped murderer of 13 people, a close ally of Lord Voldemort. And Harry Potter, by continuing to maintain contact with him, is guilty of harboring a fugitive. Harry's connection with Sirius is more than emotional, it is logistical. Their communication continues throughout the school year by use of a pair of enchanted mirrors, two-way mirrors, given to Harry by Sirius. These magical objects allow them to speak face-to-face, undetected by any authority, magical or otherwise. "If you need me, just say my name into the mirror," Sirius had instructed him. The mirror, a symbol of trust, was also a tool for secret communication, something no innocent person would casually hand over to a 15-year-old boy in a supposedly secure boarding school. Hermione Granger, ever the voice of law and reason, surprises even herself with the level of support she offers to Sirius. Though wary of bending the rules, she understands the depth of injustice done to him. She voices concern but never exposes him. "I'm not saying he's wrong, but we have to be careful, Harry. You're not supposed to be in touch with him, remember?" she says, with furrowed brows and a whisper laced with fear. Ron Weasley, on the other hand, is more openly loyal. After the events of Prisoner of Azkaban, he views Sirius with suspicion turned into admiration, and his allegiance lies more with Harry and less with any abstract concept of the law. Their bond with Sirius grows to such an extent that even dangerous missions and clandestine meetings are justified as necessary acts of defiance. One of the clearest examples is when Sirius transforms into his animagus form, a large black dog, to secretly meet Harry near Hogsmeade. Despite knowing the risk, Hermione and Ron not only refrain from reporting this incident to any adult, but actively discuss ways they could help hide him better. "We can't let him be seen," Ron had said, looking around nervously. "What if we took food from the kitchens, snuck it out to him?" The trio, then, not only protects a fugitive, but actively supports his survival. The legal implications are staggering. Under both Muggle and Wizarding law, harbouring a fugitive is a serious offence. In the magical world, the penalties could involve a trial at the Wizengamot and potential imprisonment in Azkaban itself, yet no such consequences arise. Why? Because this is a good criminal. Because Sirius Black is innocent, but more importantly, because he is part of the story's moral centre, an anti-hero rather than a true villain. This double standard is never more evident than when compared with the case of Stan Shunpike. In Half-Blood Prince, Stan is arrested under suspicion of being a Death Eater with no real evidence against him. "He's just a bloke who talks big," Harry says angrily. But Stan is imprisoned anyway. The hypocrisy is glaring. Sirius, though undeniably innocent, is still a fugitive, yet he is sheltered, aided, and even visited by schoolchildren. Harry's own moral compass is deeply affected by his connection to Sirius. There's a moment of raw vulnerability in the book when Harry says, he's the only family I've got left. That emotional dependence justifies, in Harry's mind, every rule he bends. When he dreams of Sirius being tortured at the Department of Mysteries, his immediate instinct is to break into the Ministry of Magic. He drags his friends into danger, convinced Sirius needs saving. Ironically, Sirius is not there, but Harry's actions stem from a belief that laws don't apply when love is at stake. Dumbledore, too, is complicit in this silent crime. He never turns Sirius in, despite his role as leader of the Order, and headmaster of Hogwarts. He allows Harry to visit Sirius over the holidays. He knows about the communication mirror, and while Dumbledore often walks the edge between law and justice, his failure to formally clear Sirius's name leaves him in legal limbo, a ghost of a man with no place in the world. The use of the Shrieking Shack in the third book as a temporary courtroom where Sirius's innocence is revealed to Harry, Ron, and Hermione never translated into a proper legal exoneration. No paperwork, no trial, no proclamation followed. And so, in the eyes of the Ministry, he remained guilty. And yet Harry and his friends moved forward as if the truth were law, as if justice had already been served. They chose their own version of right and wrong. In truth, they had no reason to believe Sirius would ever be forgiven. Fudge's ministry was steeped in denial and political fear. "He's a threat," Fudge had said, a known supporter of he who must not be named. The evidence that could clear Sirius, the revelation of Peter Pettigrew's survival, was too incredible, too magical to sway the minds of bureaucrats. The Golden Trio knew this, and so they acted not as citizens of a lawful world, but as revolutionaries in a hidden war.